And if you press this, it turns it on and off.
Okay, thank you. Oh, okay. Sorry, you guys. Oh, okay. Well, I'm glad you can hear me now. Good, thank you. Yeah, so that's a big difference. Okay, so I guess I'll read this poem, Hospice Spot, now. I'm moving into a part of the collection, which is when I first started to realize that I was writing in a distinctive way, and I felt like I was kind of being overtaken by something and that I just wasn't even, it wasn't myself, and maybe it wasn't human. But in this case, it was my grandfather, and he was this time he was dying in hospice, and my mom was taking care of him, so that the poem is spoken in his voice. Hospice Spot. You are my help. I lie in bed. You leave the room. You come back in. You wear a fresh dress. I raise my head. I smile at you. You go back home. You come back in. You have a bag. You could take out box. You pull out pie. You cut a piece. You hold it up. You say, remember, the kind you like. I cannot eat. I close my mouth. I smile at you. You say, remember. You want ice cream. You get a nurse. She will not feed. She makes you help. You lift the sheet. You show the nurse. Those are my legs. I want to eat. You wrap the knife. Put it away. You go back home. You come again. Your body is clean. You make me look. I smile at you. This is your work. And another poem I was writing when I was writing these, I thought of them as 4-syllable poems. I didn't know prosody at that point, which I shouldn't admit to Dr. Gibbons, but, but they're, I guess, 2 beat lines is what we might think of them. So this was inspired by Toastmasters, and I'm not a natural public speaker, and so I went to Toastmasters, and there were all these other people who didn't know how to speak, and it was fascinating. Some of the most interesting speeches you could hear at Toastmasters. So, Smart Grid. The food I eat comes from the ground, which holds the dead and keeps us well. Look at my dress. It has a waist. I walk around. I wear high heels. Before today, I could not travel. Now I have been to old Peru. Your time is up. I have expressed. I smile at you. You smile at me. Now we turn to speaker 2. We clear the air as you walk up. My family is close-knit. We watch TV. My dad tests me. I have been loved. My lips starlit. My heart is big. Those who win here learn to live long. The stars live longer than we do. They love the world. We love them back. And now we turn. You are a star, though you are wrong. What about me? You can guess. I'm speaker 2, I think. Yeah, this next one is about, there was this mint plant we had, and Aaron kind of mostly took care of it. So he was washing the plant, and it was in our kitchen sink. And one time the sun was streaming in on it, and I looked at it. And then the aphids started speaking to me. And the aphids were Catholic, just like all of us. I don't know. But the aphids and the mint. We live on mint. Let mint make mint. It is my mint. It is my food. I fill the sink, wash mint of you, so it is cleaned of those who eat. We live on mint. It is not food. It is too large for you to clean. We taste its leaves as loaves of bread. We could not eat what is so whole. This is a mint. This is its use. What do? You are not food. The mint we live. It is not ours. It gives the mint we live. We are, it is. The leaves, the lives we do not lose. They are too large. It is not yours. We are not ours, but its. Not it, but only its. Not in ourselves, but with the mint. We are its. Now you are not. Now you are off. It is all it. It is for use and nothing more. You clean for surface. The water combs. The mint remains a future place. So this next one is for the grad students. 39 is the page number, but the title is New Recruits. And this is that feeling of, I don't want to speak for everyone, but this feeling whenever there's a recruitment event of like defensiveness, like when the students are going to kind of walk up to you and ask, oh, how do you feel about it? And I'm like, don't judge me. Like, so it's called New Recruits. We gather here for you. Yours are still growing. This is near where we live. Pineapples and strawberries. We are no longer the recruits. We still have files, as do you. What is your question to anything you might reasonably ask? Ours are unchanging. We are on the website, as are the answers. We keep them that way. The fruits we eat are the ones we choose. We are no longer the recruits from the fruits that are here, as are the answers, as do you. Why are you thinking of joining to anything you might reasonably ask? We do not need to want to be here, as do you. Why are you thinking of joining pineapples and strawberries? Yeah, I would go for the food usually to these events. So the next is apparent origins. And my friend, who's more of an Americanist than I am, told me that it's my version of Robert Frost's The Gift Outright, which begins, the land was ours before it was ours, a lovely poem. But I hope mine's a little more self-conscious. I mean, it is a lovely poem because it's Robert Frost, but apparent origins. The bust of an elk, the bust of a brown bear, the bust of a bighorn sheep. I know which one is which. I have seen each kind this year. The animal skin painted by native people. I do not know which ones. I recognize those are depictions of animals. I do not know which ones. Everything else is made of woods that look like trees. They must be pines. We are in the mountains. There are mountains behind the glass. Those must be the ones. I am surrounded by all the things here. I am either in or right near them. They tell me all I know of them. They tell me what I need to know. So this next one is a poem, and my excuse for it is that it did really happen. Ash Wednesday, it was the same day as Valentine's Day, and I had quite the day, as you'll see, and it's broken into 3 sections, 3 different encounters with men. And I used to compare this to the Stations of the Cross, but then I realized the implications of such a comparison, as if interacting with these men were in any way comparable. So, metaphysical complaint on Ash Wednesday. When Valentine's Day and Ash Wednesday overlap with the black lace pinned over the red, the black does not subsume the red, but makes it sexy like date night. If red is tacked over black, then Christ on the cross becomes a Valentine's card that is country brand corny and thus a less sexy version of date night, a date without my godless husband, who especially hates country songs about Jesus. His aversion usually prevents me from desecrating my religion, as St. Valentine's feast threatens to do. Keep it from meaning. Keep from wearing a black date night dress or red to go with ashes. Keep from doing what I wish, since I love all layers of meaning. I especially love the meanings of colors and every effusion in which they get lost. Ashes. When I nod down the path, I disgruntle a man, occasioning words. At first, there was bestiality, and then women started walking around on God's earth. And I like the feeling of being off the spectrum of man and his animals. Who knows what I will do with the words one might say as one walks decently along, speaking the truth that keep their own counsel, not bothering any who doesn't butt in. What business do I have being friendly, smiling at my fellow creatures, looking just as I would if I looked at myself in the mirror? Which I sort of am doing now. A romantic effusion. This is not about me, he says. This is about me and you. Like anyone else, I would be nice if you weren't that way. That doesn't let me be who I am, for who I am in my heart would never do anything bad by you. I would not do what you make me do. I would never do anything less than you deserve. And you would have no grounds for complaint if the world were such as the world should be, and such as it needs for the proper function of you. If the world were that way, there would be no obliging those who would have you otherwise than at heart you really are. For in your heart, through which I know who you are, I am your life. That is why being together is getting down to the basics of you, getting down into where we are bodies together, and when you get up, I can never be right. Yeah. So the next one also really happened, and this was my friend in graduate school, and she had, when I say graduate school, I always call the PhD graduate school, because compared to that, the MFA was not graduate school, so just to explain my lingo. But so my friend asked me to take her then fiance to the hospital for a surgery for her because she was going to this round table about getting a job in consulting. So, and I found it a very like intimate experience, you know, like I've never been to surgery with most people, right? But he didn't really seem to look at it that way. So this is the poem that emerged. Picking up Pete. I learned today about pets from the sweetness of men, one of whom I briefly see. Another is Pete, the boyfriend of my friend. She asked me to go with him to his surgery, I think because I have my own person and care for him, though I have never done that with him. I discover when I sit next to Pete as a steadying presence, the feeling of care is completely transitive. It only becomes different when it leads to his features that differ, the joke about not being nervous and the physical fact of glasses and the lank blonde hair that makes him different from my husband and therefore from me. Makes a point of leaving his bag with me, picking it up and then coming back to put it back down, another acknowledgement of need of care. Or am I making too much of this aspect of surgery, of not taking anything or anyone with you, even if someone is there for you more than willing? Why do I latch on to caring for those when they do not especially need me to care and would not let me really, would not even let me touch them? Tentative, like other people's pets, they understand. I reach for them, then stop halfway. Now, the last one I'll read from the book is To Be Housed. And this is a romantic poem, kind of. It talks about the romantics. To be housed. I reach for you and you're not there. I imagine you're dead as Wordsworth did of Lucy, but in trying I realize I do not need to, because what I want is not you alive, but the returning pressure of the body's body. I do not want a detachable part, but a stable surface that is not there. How will sheets swarm? How will Keats console? How will crackers console? How will birds light up the mind? How will the squirrel dash to the branch? How will any change in pressure stay? Let me sit for hours, the hours a figure for time, time a figure for presence, presence a figure for God, God a figure for the lover another body. It is not there, but ours, time, presence, and God are. Ask, then feel the self getting. Ask, then feel the self getting. Getting is being felt. I wanted to read two more. These are MFA poems, and when you do an MFA program, or the Iowa Writers Workshop anyway, you start writing in a way that's more, I guess, avant-garde, one might say. I guess we learned that, you know, so many people are doing experimental poetry that writing in that way is a choice and not writing that way is a choice. And then so you just, you know, it's a hard choice to make. This is for the people who are physically gathered with us. Remember perceiving. Possible meaning, what happens to filter, fact saw, huddle of cows, the tail of one swinging. Stare now across park where they would not be. We would not return to huddle of cows. Husband driving, happy to have seen, as said on earlier trail. Look down the valley, those are the flowers you saw without closely looking. Seeing for second produces knowing enough to count as experience, is not perceiving. Seen from here, but not really. Stories from second-long thoughts of what if cows choose to gather to cancel out purpose for which they huddle, make outer. Last one swings tail to remember for something important. Though I didn't mean to imply that we're all a group of cows gathering and waiting to die. So this other one is for the people who are with us virtually, and I wrote it around the start of the coronavirus. And what I noticed is because it was the spring, so everything was new, and so seeing everyone online and having all communal life happen there. So I started to notice that turning on the computer and seeing people felt like going outside. So here it is, Access Spring. There is no wrong way, get into, just press it. Back of keyboard becomes dirt ground, press to, become a foot and see the dirt disturbed come up on outer edge of sneaker foot. You have to picture it to feel. It also work through screen. 3 children, Henry, Eleanor, and August, are holding just hatched chicks, bought for my cousin's business, taking pictures. Hold if you want. When look at child holding, feel your hand cup how you think, as underneath each click were ground, unsettled dirt for nesting, screen for looking, reaches chicks. Thank you.
You can stay here, Amanda, if you don't mind. Testing, is that working? Okay, so now we'll have a chance for a few questions from the audience, and then if there's time, I may have a few questions of my own. Do we have any questions here from the audience? And what I'll need to do, because we're recording, and this is the only mic that will go into the recording, other than the one that Amanda has, I'll just need to repeat your question back. So that's what I'm doing when I repeat your question back. Any questions in the audience?
Thank you, Amanda. I so enjoyed your reading, particularly, obviously helping me to hear you better, but I also love the way it escalated. I felt the poems built on each other very much. I particularly loved the last two. Beautiful. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about influence. I know it's a terrible question, but I noticed a lot of repetition in your poetry, some alliteration. And then I was interested on the other end of it. You talked about how in the MFA program you wrote in a way that did not feel at all like yourself, but you also spoke to sometimes in writing poems that are yours, you also felt like that yourself. So who would you say are some of your larger influences in terms of style, maybe? Maybe particularly with repetition in mind.
So in brief, the questioner has asked about influence and who are some of the stylistic influences that Dr. Auerbach would like to talk about.
Yeah, it's a good question. It's one that I was sort of always puzzled by, but actually the review that someone wrote about, or that Hannah Vanderhart wrote about the book, was helpful because it kind of explained to me things that I didn't realize about influence. Like I think Wallace Stevens really was quite a big influence. Christina Rossetti too. And Emily Dickinson. I think I did strategically not read her work as much when I was first starting the book because I almost just didn't want to know how much that was an influence. It would have not been paralyzing. And I guess Jory Graham is, of course, a big influence because she was the person, the only like kind of the main poet that I took workshops with ever. So yeah, how could she not have been a really big influence on my work and poetics? Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of, and then at the MFA program, I started to really, I was almost afraid to write in a way that wasn't experimental. So I guess I was into reading Lynn Hegenian and what other, Fanny Howe. Yeah, so those are some names.
I love hearing that range. Is there something about your poetry that feels very contemporary, but also kind of beyond contemporary? So even that range of poets is so great, you can stretch so far wide. Thank you.
Any other questions from the audience here? So the questioner asked whether Dr. Auerbach still considers her poetry to be experimental now that she's no longer pursuing the MFA or has finished the MFA.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. And actually, I'm getting this, getting to work here in this department where I'm so supported both as a creative writer and, academic, is actually kind of influencing me to want to explore more the fiction side of things. And so almost become accessible again in that way. And I have such a particular definition of experimental, though really it's writing poems that like my mom and husband don't especially understand what I'm talking about as much. That's my definition of experimental poetry. But, yeah, so I'd say that now I think I do have more of that aspiration for accessibility. Oddly, I think it's hard not to feel like my work might be more relevant. I mean, it's a hope, right? Like than it would be if I was unemployed and I don't know. So maybe that's something. Though of course, writing fiction is always a good path to being less obscure. Word to the wise.
Other questions from the audience in the room? So the questioners asked Dr. Auerbach whether she would say a little bit more about one of the poems. Is this the metaphysical reflections on Ash Wednesday?
I think To Be Housed.
To Be Housed.
Yeah.
To Be Housed.
Yeah, so yeah, that one is, it's one of those things that like, I feel like it's a little trick that can help one write poems. Like it's like a prompt almost, like, and I have a lot of anaphoras, I guess. So in terms of this is a figure for that and that is a figure for that, I think it was maybe me like being like self-consciously engaging with the romantics and feeling like, oh, this is like a poetic poem or something. And so like, of course, what's more poetic than a figure? So I guess that maybe emerged. But I think it was that sense of, I guess I was interested in, so I guess probably it was literally like Aaron wasn't around or something. I'm not really that creative. And so then I like wrote the poem, and I guess it's kind of weird that sometimes what you're most wanting, like we all like, or a lot of us kind of believe in God probably. And so there's this way in which God is present, but without but you can still just feel sort of bereft. And so I guess at the end of the poem, prayer becomes a strategy for actually feeling physically touched. But I guess some of us are less content with purely spiritual presence. Though the ideal would be that there wouldn't be a difference, I guess, that you would feel God physically too. I don't know. Good question. I'll have to think on that. Yeah.
Can you say more about why you feel an excuse is needed?
I was, oh, sorry.
So the questioners asked why Dr. Auerbach said that she felt an excuse was needed for metaphysical reflections on Ash Wednesday. Do I have the title right? Yeah.
I guess it was mostly present company, because this is a poem that I'll like read to people. And I think it's one of those things that like, I guess non-religious people are like, oh, you're not really Catholic or something. I don't know. But I guess I didn't realize before when I was reading it this time, like how it was actually like what this kind of random guy said to me on the street when I kind of smiled at him. He said at first there was bestiality, and then women started walking around on God's earth. And it didn't strike me until I was preparing for this reading, kind of how much that is like a reading of the Bible, I guess. Yeah, what was Adam doing in the Garden of Eden before Eve came along? Though, of course, I'm sure he didn't mean it that way. I don't know if he thought that much about it, but I felt like there was some apology needed for that, though I didn't come up with it.
Any other questions from the audience? The questioners ask about the title of the collection and what significance it has.
Yeah, so it was, I guess, just a line in that poem, Webbings. And I feel like one is always like in naming a collection, kind of just looking for a name that's kind of striking, like almost from an oddly like kind of marketing perspective that's somewhat independent of what's actually in the collection. But I actually, but then I was kind of satisfied that like, that it could have some other meanings in a way, like, I guess I think of the aphids, like they might kind of say something like, what need have we for such as we? Just this sense of, I guess the poems could be asking that. Why do we need to exist? And I guess I feel like that question is probably an important one. But yeah, originally it was just sort of a, oh, that sounds cool. Yeah.
Any more questions from the audience? I have a question. It's a question about grammar. The grammar in many of the poems is stripped down. It's stripped kind of bare. And I wonder why. I wonder what your intentions are for that.
Yeah. So I guess what it kind of became was, well, I guess first off, I think there were the 4-syllable lines that kind of came, and then I think that they then suggested that direction. So yeah, then it was kind of paring down naturally because I was thinking in terms of syllables. But I think then it became a question of, I guess maybe actually more as I went through the MFA than when I was writing this book, it became a question of why would there be the article there? You know, we're like wanting to like have as many things as possible be like a choice. But then that's, I mean, sometimes I feel like it's kind of you're exchanging something, right? So like sometimes like speed is a good thing in a poem and you know, a lot of the time, but then, you know, you're talking weird. So I feel like it's just a trade-off. Like what pays more, the, you know, you don't want it to feel put on, but like how many things can you kind of take out that are, can enable the voice to like, maybe it doesn't have to sound totally normal, but that can like make it not seem like kind of over the top that way. Yeah.
So you said, this is interesting, you said maybe something about choice and trying to open up choice inside the poems. Whose choice? And I wonder whether you'd say more about that.
Whose choice? That's a good question. Yeah, I guess in terms of opening up choice, I mean, kind of like there are a number of variables in any kind of given poem, right? And if you think of all the words as things that could kind of go in or not. And then it starts to feel like the choice to have like an article, which is just grammatically determined, one might think of it that way, starts to feel like a choice as soon as you have taken it away and have, you know, made a practice of that. But then I started adding them in more. So maybe it's that. It's like you stumble into writing in one kind of way, or that's what happened for me, where things were more stripped down. And then more things seemed like a choice that maybe wouldn't have otherwise seemed like a choice if I was thinking more like, you know, just the way English sentences work or something like that. Yeah.
So then another question I've had in thinking about your poetry is the question of the relationship between sound and meaning for you. How do you understand that relationship and how does it figure in the book? Yeah,
no, that's a really good question. I mean, I started to think about sound more self-consciously actually in the MFA program. But I think I always was taken with sort of theories of poetic inspiration that, you know, made the poem feel like it wasn't just kind of something I was thinking of or something like that. So sound can, I guess, be a source of that, you know, a source of momentum that is kind of bypassing intention. So yeah, sound was probably something that I wasn't thinking about, but, you know, was maybe a source of that feeling that I liked when I was writing poems.
And so, so it sounds like the MFA poetry that you've described, that's on the one hand, it may be a later development than some of this, but on the other hand, it had some pressures that were less from yourself and more from your mentors and the program. So you said before that you're interested in pursuing fiction now, which is exciting. But as you think about where you go from here as a poet, I wonder, do you think you'll build more on the style that you developed in this book, more on the MFA, or something else?
Yeah, I guess so. I have like two things that I'm sort of working on. So now my poetic work that I'm still doing at this moment is really just revising those MFA books. And so then I'm kind of having to put myself into that state of mind. Mm-hmm. It's weird though, like part of me is almost drawn to this idea of like, I don't know, like trying to write fiction and then having the poetry be something that I sort of can't help but do. And I've kind of did it some over the summer, but really not thinking about it being in a book or anything like that. So just kind of letting it be like more open and not being as like having to think about it in a career sort of context. But maybe I just feel like I need maybe the MFA is too much like that. Like you said, there were so many external pressures with like to write a certain way that that I'm feeling like I want to do the opposite now, but maybe I'll come around to figuring something else out. Maybe teaching these classes at CUA will influence me to write more traditional poems again or something. We'll see.
Okay. Thank you. I've also been wondering about biography, about the relationship between your own experiences and the poetry. And tonight in the reading, it was very interesting to hear more about it. And it sounds like so many of these poems really are biographical or emerge from real experiences that you've had. And I wonder how the writing of the poetry has affected your biography since then. So many of the poems kind of, it seems to me anyway, strive for a real immediacy of experience, but often will kind of erupt out of that into ideas and a real spiritual passions of one kind or another. So, what role does the writing of the poetry have in shaping your life, since so much of it is occasioned by your life?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that could also be one of the reasons that I sometimes like having a break from writing poetry, mm-hmm. is that it does have an effect on like what is my experience going to be like, almost as if I'm like this character in a novel whose experiences for a certain period of time, while I'm working on a project are coherent in a certain way. Whereas that's not really how life is necessarily, or how it would be. And so I started to feel and sometimes I do still feel sort of fake or like I am adopting a role. And I think that, or like, it's like almost like, oh, this experience has a kind of sensibility a poem would have or something. And that kind of is an experience that like draws me to write. But it's sometimes nice to just feel like a person. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, my last question is about teaching. You mentioned teaching a little, and I just wonder whether you have any wisdom to share with us from your experience as both a poet and a teacher of poetry. How do you think writing poetry so much has affected your teaching?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, I think it gave me confidence before I was able, like I told you, I did Toastmasters and everything. Before I was able to articulate my points in a way that maybe other people would understand as much, poetry was very important to me to like almost I felt like through poetry, I could kind of say things in a way that preserved the kernel that I want, that I like kind of felt about things, more so than in other forms of speech. But then as I've grown as a writer in other ways, like learned how to write articles and whatever, now I feel like I can express myself verbally in a way that preserves those kernels more. But I think poetry kind of empowered me to like, hey, the kernels, like the other stuff will come, whatever, the ability to like fluidly like talk about stuff in a way that most people could understand, that'll come, like, fine, don't worry, like go to Toastmasters by all means. But it was good to have that sense of, I'll keep like expressing the things that I only know how to express in this way, and eventually I'll be able to express them in other ways too. So I think I guess I would definitely want any students, I think it's good, like being a creative writer was important to me as an undergrad for that reason. And I think that as a teacher, it should influence us to remember that there's a difference between being a good writer and having good thoughts, which I think sometimes people don't realize, or maybe people have different kinds of brains and it's not as true for them. But I hold on to that difference, and I think it's important pedagogically.
Thank you so much. And for my part, I would say tonight, I think you've done Toastmasters proud.
Oh, good.
Your readings and your presentations are really enlivening and moving. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much.
I wish everyone would join me.
And all of you for coming. If you wanted to say